Welcome to Bounce, playful, unfussy conversations with SoCal's arts and culture stars. I'm your host, Susan Petrella, a lifelong arts and culture patron/advocate and the rockstar consultant who rockets your business to success. Each Wednesday, I'm hanging out with cool, clever, and creative individuals. Today's guest is MC Mary Christine Sungaila. MC works in new frontiers of law, including appellate and outer space law. Her work seeking the return of Holocaust-era artwork and protection of space cultural heritage intersects with the art focus of this podcast. If you're wondering why, she's not an artist, but her area of expertise is very connected now to art. So welcome, MC.
Thank you so much, Susan. Thanks for having me.
So I was really intrigued when I found out that MC is going to be graduating with a PhD from the University of Mississippi School of Law's Art and Space program.
Yeah, so it's an LLM in air and space law.
And so just outer space, art, cultural heritage, it just sounded so fascinating. So what's the backstory on kind of like the interest in, before we get to outer space and art?
Yeah, so I've always been an art appreciator, maybe not an art creator. And pretty early in my legal career as an appellate lawyer, I was asked to help Randy Schoenberg prepare for his argument before the U.S. Supreme Court involving Maria Altman's Klimt paintings, which eventually were returned. And so that's sort of how I first got involved in Holocaust art recovery cases. And then since that time, I've worked on several of them, including a cert petition to the U.S. Supreme Court seeking a Picasso from the Met, and also the ongoing litigation out here still involving the Cassiers and their Pizarro painting, which has been up and back and forth to various courts, the Supreme Court, I think 3 times. So I've worked on a lot of those cases, and I've had the opportunity to see, sort of the good, bad, and the ugly in terms of whether the law is helpful in returning the art to the families, or whether it actually places hurdles to that. And mostly there are hurdles.
Because there's various jurisdictions, correct?
Yeah, and there's,
involved.
Right, exactly. And there's also a lot of procedural things like, you waited too long to bring your claim, you should have known about it sooner, or U.S. law doesn't apply, Spanish law applies, and Spain has this special provision about adverse possession. If you have something for 10 years and you openly possess it, even if you got it wrongly from someone who stole it, you have the rightful title to it, and that's very different from U.S. law.
Oh, interesting. And most of that work that you're trying to retrieve is in major collections of art museums around the world, correct?
Yes, that's right. And sometimes art museums that are actually run by the state itself. So they have a deep interest in maintaining it because it's not a private museum. It's oftentimes a major museum of the country who's very proud of that particular artist or that particular work and wants to keep it rather than return it.
That was Austria, wasn't it?
Yeah, Austria definitely was on the Klimts. I mean, the Klimts are, Klimt is very well regarded in Austria and really felt as part of their culture. Yeah.
And so how did that lead to kind of art in outer space? And, I'm sure she's going to give us examples of what those would be.
Yeah.
And how you would regulate it, or, who are all the parties that would be involved?
Yeah, exactly. So my experience with the Holocaust art has been that there were really 2 choices that could have been taken after the war. One of them could have been to set up some kind of international commission or to require countries to set up commissions to return the art to the individuals who it was taken from, or was taken under duress, or these very cheap sales, all of these various ways that it was taken from Jewish families. And they did not do that. The U.S. and the Allies decided not to require that or to set that up, but rather to say we are, in typical American fashion, we're going to defer to the individual countries. Each country can figure out for itself how it wants to work that out. And so when the monuments men found a lot of the works, they returned it to the individual countries and said, okay, now you work out how you want to return that. But somehow a lot of it never made it back. So relying on the individual countries to have that kind of commission created kind of where we are now, in that the burden is on the individual families to finance the lawsuits, to pursue it, and to decide where to pursue it, and which courts they can go to, and all of that. So so that choice was made at that point. And I think that now, in retrospect, it would have been, more efficient to have set something up. And that's where a lot of the art recovery scholars and practitioners are coming to as well. They're saying, well, we have these international, at least principles, not treaties, but principles that we've all agreed to, that the right thing to do is to return this to the families who own them. But somehow that isn't happening. We have these nice pronouncements by the countries, but we don't have a mechanism to do that, and we don't have, in some cases, countries making good on what a Ninth Circuit judge here has said is really sort of a moral obligation given your agreement, public agreement about what the right thing to do is. And so, so given that, as I moved into studying space law and thinking about our very soon that many more of us will be on the moon, many more countries, many more people will be on the moon. It will get a little more crowded in certain areas there. There are a lot of historical places there, right?
Okay.
Like the boot prints, various things that that the United States left when we first visited the moon, and the landers, all of that. And also even more recent ones. So there are more recent sort of firsts. India going for the first time to parts of the moon, and so it's not just a U.S. concern, but certainly it was first a U.S. concern because we have the history there. So what do you do with that? How do you protect it? What do we call heritage in that setting? Like, what would we put on the list? And what would be the mechanism to protect that? And so I started thinking about the mechanism and thinking, well, maybe we don't want the situation we had with the Holocaust art, which is, basically gone forever or never returned. And in this case, if you, for example, muck up the boot prints, they're just gone.
Okay.
There's it's not like, well, I can go to court and I can do whatever and I can figure out some kind of claim. It's like, no, you really want to have something preemptive that disincentivizes someone from, completely erasing things or messing with things that really can't be gotten back after you've done that.
Yeah, like those, I think these young men, I don't know, what is it, in Utah, they ruined like some arch that was like 140 million years old or whatever.
Yeah, I mean,
and now we're going to be going to jail or whatever, so.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, certainly we have cultural heritage and international cultural heritage laws for Earth, but we don't have any explicitly for space or the moon right now. We don't have an explicit agreement for that. And typically what you would say is you'd say the Outer Space Treaty and other treaties say we're equally bound by other international law obligations. So we have our special space treaties, but other international obligations apply. But the heritage laws are really, if you look at them, very focused on terrestrial. So it's really hard to transfer those directly. But we do have some recognition of it. The United States has the One Small Step Act, which says, hey, any federal agency, if you're going to license anybody or allow someone to go to the moon, you have to take into account that they're that they have a plan to protect and not mess with the stuff that the U.S. considers to be, historical for us. like the Apollo
How
landing
is
site.
that up there though now? I mean, is it, they were talking about footprints. I mean, that was like when? I mean, are they, you're talking about them blowing away. I mean, are they even there anymore? Or?
Yes, because of the atmosphere on the
Oh,
moon is
okay.
very different. So yeah,
I mean, do you cordon them off like, with,
Well, that's really
with a tape
right.
measure? Like, okay, this is.
Yeah, that's one of the questions, and it's actually one of the challenges because in outer space, unlike here, there is no property ownership. So you can't say we own this part of the moon, but we can say that our space objects that we sent there and that are now there, the space objects are forever ours. So those are ours, and we can do what we can try to do to protect it, but we can't claim the land on which it sits, and we can't completely put things off limits. So how do we work with those parameters in terms of setting up some kind of perimeter and some kind of access limitation without affirmatively claiming that land? So it's an interesting question too. But I was focusing more on, okay, what if we have a dispute, or we think we might have a dispute, or somebody's going pretty near, something that actually NASA's already decided and has put out for the world. If you're planning to come somewhere near the Apollo moon base or other items on the moon that are ours, here are the scientific criteria that we ask you to follow.
Oh, okay.
Because we believe this will preserve it and not hurt it.
Do you have to so anyone going would have to sign off on that then, or just keep it in mind, or
Yes,
is it
it's kind of keep it in mind.
I mean, who's watching up there to
It's
make
kind
sure
of keep
that
it's kind of keep it in mind. But if you put that together with the treaties that talk about due regard for other people in space and other actors in space, and you say, well, you told people what they should do, what you considered to be due regard for your objects, and then they plan to violate it. That's a problem because they're supposed to show some kind of due regard for your objects. So it helps, but it's not, got to kind of put everything together in this. It's a very consensus building thing, international law. So that's out there. And then also there is kind of a set of principles, a set of agreements between now 53 countries called the Artemis Accords, which the US through NASA started and said, if you would like to agree to our general principles about how we would proceed on the moon, and one of those principles is to protect cultural heritage. So that is the one document that's outside of the US that has that explicitly noted. Like, we will work to do that. We will continue to have dialogues about how we can do that. And that is an important value that we all hold. Because I think here, when you're talking about heritage, just as you are on Earth, but even more so, I think, in space, you're talking about humanity's history.
Yes.
So if you erase that, if you erase the boot prints, if you erase that, you could change the story about humanity's exploration into space. And frankly, I think it's pretty gutsy of us to have done what we did at the time we did with the technology we had, which now is like, we look at it and we say, we did what? We went to the moon with what? And some of the astronauts came back using duct tape, in Apollo 11. So it's pretty spectacular, just I think about the human spirit and what humanity was able to accomplish and what it will continue to accomplish. And so I think that human history of space exploration is important to everyone. It's not just a national interest in a particular first that may be on the moon.
Would it just cover, say, going to the various planets, or what about, around the planets or whatever? If somebody
that's
wanted
the question,
to,
right?
Like Christo sends up some crazy, I don't know, well, he's gone now, but, I mean, somebody wants to send something out, like, there's all these satellites and paraphernalia, God, there's so much space garbage or whatever. I mean, would it cover something like that?
That's the other question,
too?
right? What would merit heritage protection, right?
Okay.
What constitutes heritage, and how do we define that? And is it just firsts or is it more than that? Is it something else?
Or like JPL, for PST Science and Art, the Brand Library in Glendale did a program with JPL. Oh, one was really very interesting because they had these kind of like stalks of, I don't know, wheat or whatever, and they had them hooked up to all of these motors or whatever, and they were weaving in the wind, but the wind was on a delayed timer. The wind was from Mars. And they were, I don't know, however they did it, they were able to bring in whatever wind was going on in Mars to this, like, all of these stalks of wheat were like moving on this delayed timer, you know? So I mean, it's like, you know, is that kind of like a piece of cultural heritage, or they're creating a lot of, you know, artifacts to send on to, you know, in their various ships that go out there to explore the universe or whatever. So would that cover? I mean, that's part of our cultural heritage. One's going to have, I can't remember, has like a poem on it or whatever. And then, you know, all sorts of like, you know, tell us your story kind of thing of all of these individuals.
Yeah, there's a lot of intertwining.
Etched on this, like, you know, whatever plate would hold up going out there, you know. So does that, that kind of thing cover it too?
And at which point does it become cultural heritage?
Yeah.
Sort of different questions.
So what will you be doing next with this degree and such, and working with putting together these kind of international organizations to monitor this art, or put together the mechanism?
So there's already an organization called For All Mankind, which is focused on explicitly protecting cultural heritage, creating the first kind of register of what might constitute cultural heritage. It's actually founded by the director of my program at Ole Miss, Michelle Hanlon. So she's continuing to do work through For All Mankind, and I'm working with her organization as well. I have actually a paper coming out, and that I presented in Italy a year ago, with this proposal of setting up an international commission for protection of cultural heritage sooner rather than later, before we're all there on the moon stomping around, which will happen in a few years. And I'm teaching space law and policy at Loyola Law School in Los Angeles for the first time.
Cool.
It's the only space law class in all of Southern California, which is interesting because there's a lot of space companies here. You know, it's aerospace. Right. That's frankly how I came here. My dad worked in aerospace, and that's how we came to Orange County.
So there's kind of a connection to rockets and space and such.
Yes. My dad was an engineer and in finance for aerospace companies, and he worked on many of the early projects, including some of the Apollo missions.
So what's been the reaction to putting together this kind of international commission? Is there like, rah, yes, we need to do this, or, you know?
Well, I think it's in the general context. I would say it's really in the context of priorities. So in general, the international community is a little bit concerned because the treaties that have been put in place were put in place when there were just countries involved in space. And now we have many companies and private individuals, universities. People can, you know, the cost has gone down quite a bit and the accessibility is there. So how do we make sure that everyone is going along with some of the principles that are in that treaty? The countries have an obligation to supervise their non-governmental actors who are doing things, but, you know, what does that mean and what does that look like? And so also, how do we apply some of these things, like you mentioned, orbital debris and sustainability? What do we do with all the junk that's out there?
Or just Blue Origin went up and down, you know, I mean.
Yeah, exactly. So space tourism, we don't really have, you know, clear criteria for that. So there are a lot of different things that people are sort of clamoring to fix. But I actually think that you might put pretty low on that, you know, cultural heritage. But I don't know that you should, because I think that's something that a lot of countries can agree on, because a lot of countries have their heritage on there that they also want to protect. But also there's general agreement, I think, around the importance of that heritage for humanity writ large. And so through the protection of heritage, you could start to set up norms about how you would handle all kinds of disputes in space. There is no like space court to go to right now.
I was going to say, is there like
is
a
no
criminal court of justice
jurisdiction.
or what, the
Yeah, you have to go to, right now, this is one of the
ICC.
things that got me to study space law, was that an international lawyer was, speaking in this class, and he was like, well, here's how you would bring a dispute if you had one in space. You'd have to basically lobby your State Department to lodge a claim against the other country that is either involved or is in charge of whoever might have done you wrong. And then you bring it to the ICJ. It's like, so you have no agency over your own claim. You have to depend on your country to do it, which could decide for various reasons not to do it, what policy reasons, where things, geopolitical reasons, what have you. And so I thought, this is just doesn't make any sense. Like, this is for a time when there were only states really involved. And that's how states handle their disputes, through diplomacy and through the International Court of Justice. But is that the only thing that we can use now, or should we be thinking about other things? So I think kind of setting a norm by setting up how a commission that would be specific to these kinds of disputes would help test, how would we like to set this up?
Is there any kind of pushback from like the private actors, like, having this oversight kind of develop, that they're not just free to, do whatever the heck they want out there in the blue?
Yeah, so the one thing that's really, it hasn't been fleshed out, but it's truly unique about international space law, which is not the case for other kinds of international law, is that the treaty has this requirement as a result of actually Russia's, Soviet Union's negotiations at the time of the Outer Space Treaty, which was they didn't want any private actors in space. Russia said, no, we just want countries. Only countries should be out there. And the US said, one day, maybe it would be more than countries, and we want to allow that to happen. And so how do we come together to have a treaty that we can agree on that would allow private actors or others to be in space, not just governments? And so the agreement they came to was that the countries, the states who are signatories to the treaties, are responsible to authorize and continually supervise non-governmental actors. So the state's on the hook for whatever the private actors do. And so the state wants to, minimize being on the hook. So the states have obligations to license, regulate, supervise the activities of these actors. And so that is the connection between our regulatory, some of our licensing and regulatory of commercial space right now, and the Outer Space Treaty obligations that the U.S. has with the rest of the world.
Interesting. Tell me a little bit more about the database that your professor has kind of created. I mean, what kind of, I don't know, what's in there?
Yeah, so
besides the footprints.
so also this sort of registry concept is something that the UN is very comfortable with. So the UN Office of Outer Space, when you launch a space object, you have to register it with this
like
general registry.
Or whatever,
yeah.
So
you can find out
kind of like things flying around.
Exactly. You have to register it and be transparent so that, for example, if one day you've got your satellite trucking along and you see this object coming towards it that you're like, oh my gosh, it's going to crash, one of us has to move, you have to know who to call. Like, whose is that?
Okay.
Who do I call?
Who do I call?
So you register it.
Yeah.
So you have to register your space objects, but and satellites and all that. So it's already kind of, we know how to do that. So this is the same kind of idea, that you would have equally a registry of objects that are considered to be cultural heritage. And so that's the question. It's in the eye of the beholder. What exactly is that? There's certain things that we can agree on, like the boot prints, like the landers, some of the firsts, but what else should be on there? So For All Mankind, in its efforts, is saying we're starting. We're going to do the first list of this, and everybody can debate it, but at least we'll have something to debate. And if the UN wants to take that and say, this is going to be our registry, we agree, that's great.
Are they looking at, I was just thinking, it came to mind like UNESCO, there's cultural sites around the world that, have UNESCO kind of,
Exactly.
designation or whatever. So they looked at that for kind of, assistance in
Yeah,
developing.
exactly. Yeah,
like-
there's parallels to that, of course. Yeah, of things we already do. Like we know,
Yeah.
we already operate that way. So why not in this venue
Oh
as
my
well?
God, I just think this is so fascinating. So, and also too, I know I read about, a program about like the astronauts that have gone, having been asked to do like kind of, artwork or something that's, close to their heart, whether it's poetry or writing or whatever. But that would that come under any of this law?
Yeah, I don't know what is left behind there, that would count for that. I think there is some of
Okay.
that. But there are a lot of astronauts are artists, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know where that program was, but there was an article about that they were asked to, or they brought in artists before they actually left to kind of work with them and say, okay, what would you maybe like to do or whatever, or you could do this or something like that.
Yeah, so like Nicole Stott, I think, did watercolors in space when she was at the ISS. And
So now who does that belong to?
that's true. The ISS is a whole other thing. ISS has a whole separate agreement between all of the countries who are involved there. So that should probably solve that question.
Oh, interesting. So that wouldn't
yeah.
come under the purview of
Yeah,
this?
no, because it's on the ISS, would be subject to the ISS.
So this kind of
agreement.
its own little island out there, its own
Yes,
little country?
absolutely, yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
you have to have your own agreements about that. How are you going to all operate on there?
If somebody wants to paint a heart on the outside, what
Yeah.
happens? When they're doing their spacewalk.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
fascinating. Well,
Yeah.
thank you, MC, for giving
Yeah.
us a little bit of background on, cultural heritage and how it works in outer space.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was
Wow.
really fun.
Yeah,
It was
it's really
fun to
fun.
discuss that.
You've made Bounce Bounce. A special thank you to our generous sponsor, Coastline College, its Fine Arts Department and Art Gallery, David Michael Lee, Director, Curator, and Professor. He's also Bounce's fabulous producer. Thank you, David. Until next time.